So worldwide, we have been locked down with this issue of the coronavirus, this pandemic, and we have heard from everybody from politicians to pundits to scientists, theologians, on what is the cause of it and what is the reason behind this pandemic. And so today, I wanted to talk about it from a cultural perspective. I'm a student of culture, and so I was thinking the other day about a book that I read many years ago by a anthropologist by the name of Mary Douglas, and she wrote a book entitled Risk and Blame, Essays in Culture Theory. Back in 1993 it was published. And so I wanted to say, to analyze how do cultures as well as people handle this whole issue of a pandemic or any other catastrophe that comes into our lives. And my students that have been in my classroom, they are very familiar with this diagram developed by Mary Douglas, and it is the grid and group model. And I obviously cannot go into detail the characteristics of each social environment or every culture, but I'm just going to give a real quick overview and try to analyze how cultures deal with the pandemic. There are four different cultural environments that we analyze. One is what we call the individualist cultures or social environment. Most North Americans will be familiar with the characteristics of individualism. There's what we call the bureaucratic. It's a high grid, high group social environment. Many people in the United States, throughout the world, belong to a bureaucratic structure, whether it's a bank, whether it's a hospital, whether it is politics, the military, highly regulated social environment. Then there's what they call the hierarchical social environment. Many people from Asia are more familiar with the hierarchical social environment. And then there's what we call the collectivist social environment or collectivist cultures. And these would be many tribal people, people that work within small groups. And this is what we call the collectivist model. So I'm going to go through each one of them very quickly because I can't go into details. So how do these different social environments see risk and blame? I'll start with the hierarchical social environment. It is more familiar with my friends in India and South Asia. It is characterized by being high grid, high group social environment. Everybody has a position within the family structure or the business structure, and they have very moderate innovation within that social environment. It's usually by consensus, led by the father or the mother or the head of the clan. And so very moderate innovation with this in social environment. Risk is related to the role. So in other words, a son can't make an individual decision that would overrule their father or the rest of the group. And group maintenance is driven. That's what drives them, is the maintaining of the group. So when analyzing the hierarchical, the hierarchus and risk, you can say that they are very holistic in their environment. It's the caste, the tribe, the clan, the family, and they're very much cohesive in their approach and in their interaction to not only within the group but outside the group. Their faith or their belief or their actions is in the family and by the clan decisions. Individualism is seen as dangerous or even a betrayal. And I've said this many times that I believe that when you get into a social environment like in South Asia or maybe even the Amish people, doing individual things is often frowned upon and is dangerous and even a betrayal to the family. That's the reason Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus and Sikhs are very resident to be a follower of Christ, because it is a betrayal of family values and faith and religion, and therefore they will not take that risk. How do the hierarchists, where do they associate blame? Well, many of them would say karma. What goes around comes around. In my former life, I did certain things, and as a result of that, I'm now being paid back for a former life. Or maybe they will blame violators of the family or clan rules. Or maybe it's just fate, fatalism. When you talk to a Muslim and you ask them about the whole issue of the pandemic, or maybe even if you can have lunch with them tomorrow, their answer will generally end with Insha'Allah, if God wills. And so it is fatalism on every area of their life. The collectivists, and again, I would group many tribal people in Asia, Africa into this group, or this social environment. Low grid, high group. A task is assigned by the need or purpose of the group. They are role workers within that particular social environment. Moderate innovation, very measured in their risk taking, and they, like the hierarchists, they are driven by a group interest. I hear some of the ways that you can look at collectivists as they look at risk. Multi-individualism, desiring to be a part of something but not authoritarian. That's the reason I have this picture of a small Bible study group. They belong to maybe a small church or a large church, but they get into smaller groups. They don't want the authoritative feel. They're not like the bureaucrats. The cause of the group is greater than personal reward, so risk is very much measured in a collectivist social environment. Collectivists and blame, violation of rules, is one reason that there may be a problem within the society. And so if people violate the rules of the group, then there are consequences to be paid. Outsiders of the group also could be the reason for the problem. I have a younger daughter living in Senegal. Many of the Senegalese look at the foreigner, the Tubaab, as the reason for the pandemic coming into their country. And so they will blame outsiders. Even Americans have blamed outsiders for the reason for this pandemic. Or maybe it's a violation of taboo. Maybe they did something or say something that was taboo within that group, and as a result of that, they would cast blame. A lot of the tribal people, as you understand, they do believe in spirits. They believe in good spirits, bad spirits, and so whenever there's a problem within the society or culture, within the village, many times they will look to taboo violations as a reason for their situation. Now, this particular environment is much more recognizable for North Americans. That's not to say that other cultures don't have it, but bureaucrats and risk, they are considered a hybrid, low group social environment. They work as within the corporate environment or the bureaucratic environment, limited innovation, very risk adverse, and they are policy driven. Now, this is true of countries, but it's also true of companies. And so many people, they work within a bureaucratic system, or they have a bureaucratic mindset. They have always been and worked in that social environment. So they look at risk. They have a very strong belief in the system. Whether it's the government or science, it has the answers. And of course, I've been hearing a lot of chatter on the news and Facebook on the guidelines of what the bureaucrats would have us to do. And there are many people that have a high belief in the answers of the government and science to solve this problem. Why? The bureaucrats provide security. That's the reason you get into a bureaucratic structure. You have a job, you stay in that job, and you you have a certain amount of security, and they put their faith in the structure. But they're very risk adverse, and they hardly ever will go outside the bureaucratic system in making their decisions. Bureaucrats cast blame on generally people at the top, or someone that's above them in status. It's my boss. It's the president. It's my manager. It could be anybody that's above them. And if there's any problems, generally we can point towards someone else for their problems. Very seldom will they take blame for themselves, though sometimes, of course, they will. They will also sometimes blame risk takers, those that break the rules, those that are not willing to follow the guidelines. And so they would cast blame on the risk takers. The last one I want to look at is the individualists. And of course, most North Americans would identify with this. The characteristics of individualism is the group is low, the grid is low, task depends on self-interest, specialized worker, highly innovative, risk takers, vision driven. This is the characteristic of individualism. You could also say it is the characteristics of entrepreneurs and people that go out and carve their own way in life. Our country was founded on individualism. People that came to our country and covered our land and broke new ground to start a new life are the DNA of most North Americans is individualism and risk-taking. They lean towards self-determination, willing to take a leap of faith for what they believe in, know the difference between risk and recklessness. You know the old adage, there's a difference between faith and foolishness. Well, for individualism, we understand, or they understand, that there's a difference between taking a risk and being reckless. Individualism and blame. Well, individualists will many times blame bureaucracy, the people on the top. And so again, as I listen to the chatter that's going on within the society, I hear people blame bureaucrats and for the reason for the lockdown and maybe for the reason for the situation that we are now in. Individuals will take personal responsibility from times. Sometimes they'll say, hey, it was my fault. I took a risk and I didn't make it, or I failed. But that's how they would look at it. Well, listen, this is just looking at risk and blame as it relates to culture. And so I hope that you enjoyed it, and you may agree or disagree with it. But risk and blame, and how do you individually as well as a culture look at the situation that we now find ourselves?